Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all ages, persuasions, and even the creeps that put milk into the cup first and then put tea in afterwards. I'm alone in Finland, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about knowledge and wisdom. However, this video is primarily, I am sort of testing out my audio capabilities, and there is something janky between me uploading, creating a video and uploading it where some sound is going to one side, so it's kind of about that. But I wanted to also make it a little point about some of the stuff that I'll talk about in the future that will come up in various videos, because some of this is sort of not well known, and some of it some people know and some people have no sort of concept of, and that is to do with sort of knowledge and how essentially how smart we are, and the fact that being smart can be several different things. You could be very intelligent in one way and have a complete lacking of it in another way. And although this video is not going to be about ADHD, I'm going to sort of clarify this in the beginning. I am somebody who at 40 years old discovered that he was ADHD. Essentially, I discovered because Instagram Reels was a thing. There was a young lad that was making a whole load of funny videos, and I would see these sort of describing ADHD, and I went, ha, that's funny, that's like me. And then after the 7th time that had happened from the same person's videos, I was sat there going, how is he describing my life? This is weird. So I went to a doctor saw me, and although it takes normally 6 months to diagnose, I live in Finland, I am an immigrant because I'm from Scotland, and it took me almost 2 years. It was a long and drawn out process because my doctor was not particularly good, which is something that people will deal with. However, I now have an ADHD diagnosis, and to quote some people, I am like the alpha condition. So ADHD falls into two categories. You have inattentive, which is where you find it difficult to pay attention to things. You're kind of closed in on yourself, you're quite quiet, which is predominantly women that are diagnosed with it. Now, they will say that it's predominantly women that have it, but I don't believe that. From the experience I've seen, there are as many people that I know that have that same type of ADHD that are male. However, they are not diagnosed, and because of the lack of diagnosis for inattentive, it's sort of skewed the numbers. But that's personal opinion, that's not backed up by fact. Then you have hyperactive, which is your atypical ADHD, what people think of. Kid that is particularly hyperactive, but in the class they're not paying attention to the teacher. A lot of people in older life will label them as lazy because they don't understand what's wrong when it comes to ADHD. What is the difference in somebody's head? Because it is a physical difference. It is a neurochemical difference between people. So people that have ADHD are reactive as opposed to sort of linearly thinking. You don't plan out ahead as well, but you react better. And this is where you see an awful lot of people talking about ADHD superpowers, where they have the ability to hyper focus on a task and do sort of 8 hours of work in 2 hours. But then the rest of the time they're sat there having problems trying to engage themselves to do something because the next task is kind of boring. So that's the sort of base idea of it. I am combined type, which is the benefit of absolutely everything. And there is a bit of a misnomer even in the name. It's not an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. First off, it's not a disorder because it's sort of the genetic originality of humanity. Animals run in the same way. You are reactive to things as opposed to linearly thinking. One of the main theories, which has been somewhat genetically proven, is that everybody was ADHD, then as we moved from hunter-gatherers to farming lifestyle, that mentality sort of came forward, and that sort of was more successful because you're no longer reactive. So it's not a disorder. Now, the other parts of it, attention deficit hyperactivity, yes, some people can have a hyperactivity, but not everybody. So 2 parts of the name are wrong. And the last part, the first section of it, an attention deficit. Somebody that looks like they're not concentrating is actually usually in their head thinking about something. It's not in a deficit of attention, it's a regulation of attention. The teacher at the front of the class is more boring than what's in my head or what I am picturing running around the courtyard outside the classroom, so they do not have my attention, I have my attention. So it's not a lack of it, it's just a regulation issue. And this is something that for a lot of people, especially now, ADHD is coming into the news, and you will see doctors coming out there and saying, well, it's overdiagnosed. And that itself comes down to what I'm going to talk about. But it's because the doctors have no frame of reference or study in it. They go out there with their medical degree and say, well, I'm a doctor. Okay, what are you a doctor of? Well, I'm a doctor of whatever that is not related to psychology. Or in my case, when my psychologist was a problem, it was somebody who immediately suggested bipolar disorder. Now, for those of you that don't know, about 15 years ago, the standard for ADHD had overlaps with bipolar disorder, but with more research and sort of paying attention to the symptoms and things like this, we now know that they are two entirely separate things with no crossover. Part of the reason is because people might get emotional dysregulation with ADHD, where they react more strongly to emotional stimuli. They get happier easier, they get sadder easier. So somebody critiquing them honestly and openly might have quite a nasty effect, as if they hadn't critiqued them but they had screamed at them that they were the worst person in the world. That's part of emotional dysregulation. So it could come to somebody going in for an ADHD diagnosis 15 years ago that would say, they would ask, do you have emotional issues? And they go, oh yes, I can get sad easier, I can get happier easier. Okay, is there a reason for that? And the instant answer would be no. But it's because the person hasn't looked at themselves closely enough to go, did somebody say something that set me off? Was there something slight? Or even they might know that there was something that set them off, but it was so inconsequential, they didn't want the embarrassment of admitting to it. So they would be labelled as bipolar. And that is one of the big problems with ADHD in women, is that a vast majority of them have been labelled as bipolar, which then sort of knocks into all sorts of things where pharmacology, treatments, sort of drug treatments, do not work correctly in some instances for people with ADHD, because there is a serotonin and a dopamine sort of difference, the way that it's working, the way that the normal levels sit. So there can be problems there, which has shown up in a couple of studies, not studies on the fact, but sort of side notes that have noted that people with ADHD have a higher instance of becoming suicidal or acting on suicidal impulses when they have been given these types of drugs than people that are neurotypical. So that's a little sort of side note to this, because it sort of explains where I'm coming from and some of the stuff that I've got through. But what I want to talk about in general is that sort of that knowledge, because we all have things that we know, but we are not entirely sure A, where we remember them from, because just the nature of picking up knowledge, and B, if they are true or not. There are some things that we would get taught, we would get told as children, that we just hold as true. And then years and years later, somebody would come along and say, no, that's not actually true. And I'm not talking about opinions. I'm not talking about, oh, we've decided these planetoids under this size are this big, therefore Pluto is no longer a planet. I'm talking about things that are like, just, they exist, but we are told sort of different schematics for them. I've mentioned this before, but the best example is the snowflake example, where everybody sort of understands that no two snowflakes are alike, except snowflakes, the study behind that was a study of 500 snowflakes in a snowstorm, when billions and billions and trillions of snowflakes can fall in one snowstorm. So it's a sample size so small to be irrelevant. And another really funny example of this is if you ask people about red meat, eating red meat, and they will talk about, well, red meat can increase your cholesterol, or red meat increases your risk of cancer. Now, there are two specific scientific reasons for this. Now, I'll start with reverse order in this. So the most recent one was studies that were done in the 90s and the early 2000s that were statistical studies. And they went and they asked a whole load of people questions because they were trying to confirm previous science, confirm or disprove previous science that was done in the 50s and 60s. And they went out and they asked a whole load of people, do you eat red meat? And then, what's your cholesterol? And then they compared that to people that didn't eat red meat and that didn't have, and that sort of where the cholesterol was. They did it with cancer, people that had cancer as well, and do you consume red meat? But if you know about that, that sounds legitimate. But a statistical study is a questionnaire, and the question is very important in that, because when you're talking about red meat, they weren't asking people who ate beautifully hand-reared, massaged cattle, porterhouse steaks. They were talking about any red meat. So cheap shit mince from Aldi was considered red meat. Burgers, because they have something in them that has red meat, was considered as you eating red meat, with all of the sugars, all of the processed stuff around about them. And because fast food burgers are one of the most commonly consumed pieces of red meat, that skewed the study massively. So somebody that eats red meat and doesn't eat any processed foods is not the same as somebody that has 5 McDonald's a week. So immediately knowing that, you know exactly how skewed the study is, because there's so much else that could affect it, but they were only asking one question. So that kind of invalidates all of the studies that surrounded that. But then on top of that, when you find out the information they were trying to confirm in the first place. Now, the original studies that gave us the idea that red meat raises cholesterol and that red meat has instances of cancer were studies in the 50s and 60s that were performed on rabbits. Now, you may spot something straight away. Rabbits don't eat meat, so how the hell were they feeding them meat? You cannot get a normal rabbit to eat meat. Even in starvation, it won't eat red meat. Unless they are so severely inbred that they have phenomenal amounts of problems health-wise. Then you will get something that will start to eat meat. And I have personally experienced this. I had a lovely little rabbit called Midge, and Midge was fantastic. Midge was very funny. If you happen to know breeds of rabbits, the colourings do come in breeds. She was an English butterfly rabbit. Now, an English butterfly has a very specific colouring to it. It's black and white or grey and white, and there is a very specific pattern. There's a black stripe down the back to the nose. There's 2 sets of spots on the side of the body. And she didn't have any spots on the side of the body. And neither did any of her kin. And it turns out that this was the problem. Now, one day, my wife is sat there. The rabbit hops up on the couch. The rabbit runs around. By the way, rabbits should not be in cages. They are like dogs. They have wide areas. So you should teach them, like potty train them and have them round the house. But that's by the by. So the rabbit hops up, goes round my wife's shoulder, leans over and grabs a piece of pepperoni off of the pizza. Not the pizza, just the pepperoni. And then goes and eats it. So we grab it off of her because she shouldn't be doing this. And she continues to try to get to the meat. And then if you had ham, if you had pastrami or something like that on a sandwich, she would try to get to the meat. She always wanted that for some reason. A few years later, knowing this and not letting her have meat, something funny happened where she came out of her cage and tried to sort of bounce over the top of another rabbit and screamed. And if you've ever heard a rabbit scream, it sounds like a baby scream. It's horrendous. And it turns out, after taking her to the vet, that she had broken her leg. And she had to be put down. And when the vet was sort of looking at what was going on, when she had looked at the leg, she had said that the bones were undeveloped. And that it's most likely because she was inbred. So the vet did some checks and things like this. And was like, yes, there are several health problems with this particular rabbit. And part of it is the markings. She was so heavily inbred in an animal that can actually stand inbreeding quite significantly because of their genetic structure, that she had health problems. And that was actually part of the reason why she would eat meat. She had frail bones, she had sort of tumours and things like this, which are all symptoms of this heavy inbreeding. So this goes back to this study, or these studies, because there was a few of them, that happened in the 60s and 50s, where they had rabbits that would eat meat. So having rabbits that would eat meat means that there's already health problems. So there is no legitimate test there at all. But then on top of that, they are feeding something that doesn't consume meat. So you're going to get a cholesterol spike. So the entire original study was horseshit. And everything following that was horseshit. And this is something that is sort of, it's essential to sort of understand when we are talking about knowledge, because it's not just your ability to understand something or your ability to learn something, which are not the same thing. If you had the ability to take in information and to memorize what was being said to you and recall it at will, you would be one of the smartest people in the world, even without the ability to apply that information and extrapolate from it. This is something about IQ tests. A correct IQ test, like the ones done by Mensa and some other institutions, the questions contain everything for the answer, with the exception of the base language of the question and basic maths, so addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. The vast majority of questions are actually to do with graphical images. And the reason for that is that they're testing your ability to extrapolate information, your ability to act on the information there and draw conclusions from it. That's how they are measuring intelligence. They are not measuring knowledge that was gained before the test. They are not sort of measuring your ability to learn and apply. They're only measuring one thing, which is why you can get people who are legitimately geniuses that have certificates from Mensa and are dumbasses in all other respects. And I know one particular guy. He is lovely. He is an absolute sweetheart. He is a physicist, and this is his day job. He thinks of all of these massive things. He does applied physics and all sorts of scary stuff that you don't want to know about. Nobody wants to know about. But he is also somebody who is, in general, one of the sort of naivest people that I know. He is so sweet and innocent. He's been scammed more than once online from daft things like that because he has no sort of common sense. He has academic sense but not common sense. So this is sort of what we're looking at when we're talking about different types of intelligence and how different intelligence works. The best sort of thing for somebody to be smart isn't just the ability to learn information. Bearing in mind, I'm ADHD, I have an above average measured intelligence, but I also have, by definition with ADHD, a learning difficulty, which is feckin' hysterical to me. Because I can sit in a classroom and just, it washes over me if I'm not interested in the subject. So for instance at school, my sitting in history class or religious education or any of that nonsense just bored me to tears, and I would get low marks. But when I was interested in a subject, so for instance craft and disaster, woodworking and metalworking, or computing, or actually English, because our English classes were hysterical. We had 2 class clowns that get made to read a whole load of plays together, and if you've ever heard Romeo and Juliet done by 2 American yokels, it's the funniest thing I've ever heard. But these were the sort of things where I did really well because I was interested in the subject. So I had a big divide. It wasn't a case of middle of the road, it was a case of 1s and 2s at one end and 5s and 6s at the other. So it was something particularly funny for me because nobody could figure out what the hell was going on. And I personally think, and this is just opinion, that there's a far higher level of ADHD in Scotland than even in England. And that's why it's such a difficult thing for teachers to sort of discern it, because you pick out the class clown, but in my class there was 6 class clowns. So it's not an unusual thing. It's not the raised nail that gets the hammer, because there were so many of us above the threshold. So that's something that's sort of close to home for me and something that I looked at. And in general, I noticed that one of the things, especially in these days and ages of polarised politics and war and bullshit like that, that you have people that will stick to their views, and when they are presented with new information that contradicts their knowledge, they will then not accept that new information. There is sort of terms for this cognitive bias. Cognitive bias isn't one, but there is terms for that I've forgotten now. However, it is the inability to accept something new, or the time that it takes, because you've learned your truth originally and somebody presents you with better information. You don't want to be wrong, And this comes an awful lot of the way. You get people that are stuck into sort of political leanings because they originally agreed that way. And then, say for instance, the right nowadays has moved so far to the right that they are slightly right of, in some instances, slightly right of some of the most evil places that have existed in humanity. And you've got people who identify themselves as right, but from 40 years ago. And it's because, say for instance, they believed in smaller government. They believed in sort of freedom of opportunity. They didn't want too many shackles on them. But then their entire political party has leached to the right, and they are now stuck there, sort of wanting to maintain their identity, when actually nowadays they are a centrist or even left-leaning. I used to consider myself a centrist, and now I'm sort of stuck on the left, kind of looking at a whole load of the extreme left going, you guys are as fucking bad as the other side. What the hell? It's sort of taking issue by issue. But that is the sort of core tenet of this, of knowledge, of learning, is that it's not just learning new things, it's learning the information that affects what you already know, sort of relearning things, changing your views on new evidence. Because if you're not willing to change your views after you've learned something, then you will most probably always be wrong, because everything that we learn at some point gets replaced. The nature of teaching children requires that we teach things that are so simplified for them to understand that they will be wrong when they are becoming more complex. And that is just the nature of teaching some things. Finnish language that I have to learn is fraught with this, because they teach, there's a thing called consonant graduation. And essentially it's when you make certain sounds, they become harder when you are pronouncing them with other words. So for instance, a K, or a ko as it's pronounced, instead of pronouncing it singularly, you will pronounce it harder. So instead of k, it would be k, and daft things like this. And when they teach it early on, they teach you that you must read every letter in a word. However, certain words, like K, don't actually follow that. So you don't pronounce two Ks, you actually leave a gap, what they call a glottal stop, in front of that letter. So they've taught you the basics, but the basics are actually wrong almost immediately. But they needed to teach you that to teach the rhythm of other things. I particularly disagree with that way of teaching for that particular subject, but it is a good example in general, because we are taught things that are incorrect because of how simple they are. And it's something that is quite funny, because I've got it with my kids now, where they will see something and they're sort of asking about life, but there is no way to simplify it down that it is still accurate. So the examples you give have to be slightly inaccurate, but it's best to tell them that this isn't the correct way, that you're trying to explain it, and it might get more complex and stuff like this. But that's just the nature of learning. You have to be ready to accept new information, and to accept information in a different way. And it's something that's particularly funny when we look at primary school education. You get an awful lot of comics that do the same stand-up line, where they are talking about how maths is awful and they don't use maths in real life. And everybody laughs along and chuckles along. But it's missing the same fact of why you're taught maths. The reason why you would do a language, why you would do maths, why you would do some science, it's not for teaching those subjects. That's part of it. But the other part is that these require different methods to learn them. So teaching a variety of things that requires a different thought process is the point. You need to think in different ways so you can learn in different ways. The problem is that they never fucking explain that. So you've got a whole load of teachers going, you will need maths. Why? 'Cause you'll use it one day. And the line for the younger audience, this will make the older audience laugh and the younger audience might not get it. We used to constantly be told in school, you will not have a calculator in your pocket. And every person now is looking back at those teachers just going, ha, you fucking idiot. But that was the sort of the best knowledge at the time. they were trying to teach and it hadn't been fully explained to them, because the people that were teaching maths had learned maths in school, gone to university and done maths, and then done teaching, or vice versa, done teaching and then done maths again, and then come back into a school. They had no real world experience to apply what they had learned, so their knowledge base was very narrow, to the point of not being able to explain why you need what they are teaching. And they were entirely right. You did need it. The ability to do maths very quickly in your head is something that is advantageous, but it is also not just advantageous in the way that it is teaching you to do sums. It's advantageous in the way that it's teaching your brain how to flexibly process stuff. It's like with a computer today. If you've got a PC that can just do one single thing on one core very fast, it might be fantastic. But if you want to do something else, like it's not gaming, it's video processing, that one computer, one PC chip with one core that can do one thing very fast is not as good as a Threadripper that is slower in clock speed but has 60 cores to be able to process stuff simultaneously. That's what we're sort of looking from our brain. And that's sort of that bit of knowledge that's kind of lost in general, that a lot of people don't understand. Even getting to my age or older, this came because of a conversation I was having with somebody, a very good friend of mine, who happens to be about 15 years older than me. And we were teaching this, and he's like, well, I've never used maths in my entire life. And I'm sat there going, you've just bitched about doing your accounts. You learned math. You had to apply that. You learned computing. You had to use Excel and work out all of this stuff. You're a company owner that does your own business. You're using the math they taught you and then sat there bold-facedly lying to me without realising it. It's not anything malicious, but you have no clue that you're applying what was taught to you. That when you go into the shop and add up what's in your head, what's in your cart, that you are doing math and you're doing it in your head, because there are people that legitimately didn't get schooling. And unfortunately for me, I know a few of these that come from first world countries where their ability to do basic math is shockingly lacking. If you give two-digit numbers, they cannot add them in their head. Yet my time with a lot of the immigrant community here in Finland, because I'm an immigrant, I know a lot of immigrants that are non-Finnish speaking, therefore I know people from East Asia, West Asia, Middle East, all of that jazz. And the guys that are sort of, let's say around about the Horn of Africa, so Somali, Eritrea, Kenyan, etc. There's a few different groups there going across the sea to Sudanese and stuff like that. There's a whole load of people there that have sort of base processing, your basic math skills, that are off the charts, that can do three-digit multiplication, no problem. Because they never had the chance of using a calculator, so it was drilled into them in school. They have passed the same sort of levels of qualification as the people in the West. The people in the West just don't happen to understand that. But their math skills are better. Their base processing is better. And out of all of these immigrants, which is hysterical to me, the vast majority of them speak English at a high level, like beyond Scouser level. And if you don't get that joke, you've not lived in England, just Google a Scouse accent and you'll understand. But that's the sort of level we're talking about. You've got people that speak English higher than English people that are sort of, well, they don't understand much because they didn't have the same opportunities. No, they actually understand more because they had less. And that sort of all flows into this. We have gaps in our knowledge, and it's not the ability to learn new things. It's the ability to learn new things that contradict what we know. It's the ability to say you don't know something or you are unsure because something has been contradicted. This comes to company management as well. If you've ever had one of those bosses who would refuse to acknowledge that they were wrong, you will know how bad that has been. If you've had a parent that would never stand to be wrong, you would understand how bad that is. And it's something that we need to pass on to our society, our children, etc., to learn that saying I don't know is the smartest answer in any circumstance, because if you don't know and you say it, then you're going to learn something. Whereas if you sort of bluster through, I've had so many of these over my time where I've dealt with managers that have come in, management degrees, or people that were promoted through nepotism, or they were promoted to get them out of a particular place because they were stupid. So they got promoted because the boss couldn't fire them. And these people come in and they just cannot admit when they were wrong. A really funny example of this is a volleyball pitch, of all things. Boss of mine had this idea for a volleyball pitch on a kids' centre, and he had a place in mind for it. So he goes to a staff member that's sort of senior staff and says, where would you put this? And they say, oh, the opposite side of the field. He doesn't like that answer. He says, what about here? And they're like, no, that's an awful place. So he goes to another staff member and he says, where would you put it? And he was asking the question initially. He went to 15 staff members, the entire senior team. And he said where. And he got a good sort of 7 or 8 different answers. And every time he went, what about here? And his idea. And everybody said it was a stupid idea. Because you cannot build a volleyball pitch on a slope. Because rain in Wales will push sand out of the volleyball pitch. So him being him and unable to admit he was wrong, he had that pitch built there anyway. He had, I don't know, I think it was like 26 tons of sand dropped onto the thing, smoothed out, all of that jazz. And 3 weeks later, after about 4 days of rain in those 3 weeks, half of the sand was all the way down the grass at the bottom of the pitch. And everybody sat there going, yeah, we knew this would happen. And still, he just ordered more sand instead of moving the pitch. It wasn't a particularly difficult job. The actual building of the pitch was in-house. It wasn't costing him any money. The only money was on the sand. And he would be happy to waste money refilling that pitch every month instead of moving it 7 metres, because he couldn't admit he was wrong. So that's this sort of idea expansion. I'm recording this in a funny way so that I can test all of the stuff. So if you are hearing this in one ear, I apologise, but hopefully not. I think I've got it sorted, but we shall see. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I know there's been sort of randomness in the background, and yes, I have a shiny ship and I had to put that in because it's so shiny. But with all that being said, thanks for your attention. Thanks for your sort of likes, subscribes, comments. Everybody knows that I like the comments the most. The subscriptions are very heartwarming. I sort of thank you for that. If you've gotten through this, if you like these sort of videos, there are some that are games, there are some that are just me talking. I will be doing a fair bit more of the live streams. I'm also going to be live streaming from about 10 o'clock tomorrow. I believe it's 10 o'clock finish time, which, if I just do a quick calculation on my thing, is about 7 o'clock Eve time. But I am going to be playing Death Stranding again. I'm trying to get a bit more footage for that, so I figured if I've got a time for streaming, that I might actually couple them together. So if you want to talk or chat, you're always welcome in the comments. It's not like members only or any of that stuff. I will be figuring out some stuff to do for the members, but at the moment I don't have any, so I don't need to. But it will not be putting time limits or stuff like that behind content. I don't even like the word content. I just had a wave of hate now that I've said it. But I don't want to put anything for what I'm putting out there. I don't want to lock it behind that. Maybe if it's like chatting with some people or the members or stuff like that, maybe that's something at one point, but the videos I put out will never be sort of time locked or anything like that. I just, even though it could make money, I feel wrong doing that. It's just weird. Your watching time is what I value. If you want to put a bit more in, then that's always thanked. Patreon and all and coffee and that exist, but it's still, I just feel wrong, sort of. It feels disrespectful for the people that have gotten me here. So thanks for watching and all that jazz. As usual, please comments and like any stories and stuff like that, especially if you've got stories of bad managers of absolute fuckwits and stuff like that. Good examples of people not learning stuff. I've seen an awful lot of this fairly recently on YouTube, where these tech stories that have been stolen off of Reddit, and I'm just watching them going, what the fuck is going on here? Because they're sort of written in a very immature way. You can tell by the reading age that they are not somebody who is particularly old or well developed, but then they also have sort of inconsistencies. I saw one the other day that had somebody talking about how my sister was made the CEO of the company and this was bad and blah, 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 blah. And the entire sort of reasoning behind what they were talking about was they didn't understand the difference between a CEO and an owner. So you could tell the entire story was nonsense, because that key definition, somebody who was part of a big company would understand. And I was just like, why put this stuff out there? I don't understand. It's good as a writing exercise, but then put it into a fictional thing. You'll get good writing and feedback and stuff like that. So either way, that is my spiel today. There shall be some more spiels coming on. I'm currently sort of going through a bit of Death Stranding for general footage, because I'm trying to make a video about what is awesome about that game. And I'm going through a little bit of PvP stuff for EVE Online. And separately, I'm also trying to train up a second character specifically for doing angel stuff, because I haven't done that new side of it. I'm very interested in it, but I also don't want to absolutely screw my standing. So I'm going to be bringing up somebody that is sort of that way inclined, but they're also not high skill level. So it's starting at the beginning and sort of progressing through, if anybody wants to see that. They're a little above alpha when it comes to skill training, but they're not at 10 million points yet. So about 1.5 times alpha, I think it is. But yeah, so thanks for watching. Bye.